The city of Poway says no to an affordable housing development for veterans. Republicans vow to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act. How will California be affected? And Donald Trump's education nominee is a big fan of charter schools. How will the advocacy play in San Diego? I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today, a reporter Maya Srikrishnan, a Voice of San Diego. How are you today?
Hi, Mark.
Good to see you again. Maya, Kenny Goldberg, health reporter for KPBS News. Hi, Kenny.
Hi, Mark.
Glad you're here today. And reporter Mario Caran, also a Voice of San Diego. Hi, Mario.
Hey, Mark.
Well, the San Diego region, as we know, is desperate for affordable housing. The city of Poway has a 2.5 acres legally committed to that purpose. A proposal called for 22 low-cost homes to be built there. Sounds like a solid step forward, right? Well, not so fast. So, Maya, start with who was going to build these homes and who were they targeted for?
So Habitat for Humanity was partnering with the city of Poway to build on this piece of city-owned property. They were going to build 22 for-sale homes for veterans. Okay. And so, I mean, a pretty straightforward project here. And then the debate took off. Where were these homes going to go? As I mentioned at the outset, there was kind of a dedicated plot of land. Yeah, so there was a roughly 2.5 acre plot of land at the corner of Twin Peaks and Espola Road in Poway. And it was property that was legally bound to be used for affordable housing, and so the city of Poway had kind of entered into this negotiation agreement with Habitat for Humanity a couple of years ago. Now, is this kind of a upscale neighborhood, or how would you characterize it? I mean, Poway in general is a pretty affluent city. Okay, and the houses themselves, were they going to be, monstrosities, these McMansions as we know, or were they going to be fairly downscale? They weren't going to be downscale. I mean, they were going to be duplexes and triplexes, so they were going to be slightly more dense than the surrounding neighborhoods, okay. Yes. All right, now several public hearings on this before the final vote. What were those hearings like? They got contentious, did they not? Yes, they were very intense. Starting in about July, there were public hearings, maybe like 3 or 4 of them before the final vote in November, and every hearing, there were dozens of neighbors who showed up to kind of speak out against the project. All right. And what were some of the main objections that people were making? Density and traffic were 2 huge issues. One of the big issues were neighbors were also concerned about crime, funding of the project, and the density of the project and the people who are going to be living there. Okay. Now, and then it veered off into other descriptions there after a community meeting in July on the proposal. We had a Poway resident, Linda Jeffrey. She sent an angry email to the city. I'm going to read that for our radio audience. All agreed that we as citizens of the USA owe our military men and women health care services through the VA. We owe them respect for their service. We owe them the GI Bill, some assistance to get an education, start on their careers, period. We do not owe them a house in Poway. So it veered into an argument like that, at least among some folks, huh? Yeah, so a lot of the people who showed up to speak in support of the project were veterans who were on the interest list. So they were people who were actually hoping to own those homes once they were built. And a lot of the arguments that they were using was, that neighbors were complaining about traffic and density, and they were saying, we served in a war to protect this country. Why are we having to fight a battle over these things in our own country to be able to find an affordable place to live? Okay. And so the residents didn't really appreciate the fact that they were being shamed over their opposition.
Maya, what kind of legal obligation does Poway have to put affordable housing in the city?
So the state requires that each jurisdiction allows for affordable housing, so that means that they need to zone for it, usually higher density properties. The state doesn't actually enforce that this housing is built as of now. So it's kind of, cities do have an obligation in some way, but if they don't build it, there's not so much that happens. Mario?
Yeah, so you've covered this issue in other communities. How would you compare what you saw in Poway compared to any other places that you visited?
So one of the things that I've noticed in covering the county is that in affluent communities, often along the coast or in places like Poway, there's a lot more opposition to new housing at almost all income levels, particularly at the lower income levels. And in other communities, like National City, for example, that's denser and lower income to begin with, there's less opposition when people are putting in new buildings. But I think that we saw with the election this year, even with Measure T and Encinitas, that was meant to implement a state law for affordable housing.
Yeah,
and
they
it
have
had,
to do that.
Yeah, and it had a lot of opposition in Encinitas. So I think in affluent communities, we see this over and over again, that they kind of don't want their communities to change, even if it means that other people don't get housing.
And they're concerned about the property values, I guess, because if I have to resell, and of course we have a very heated market again across the county here, then the concern is that people may not find it that desirable if there's low-income housing and mixed in with where we are.
These things weren't going to be shacks, I take it. I mean, isn't that they'd fit into the community somehow?
Yeah, they would be slightly more dense than what was there, but I think a lot of people still have an idea of low-income housing as being like the projects in Chicago from decades ago, and that's just not the case anymore. These places, and there are other affordable housing apartments in Poway, and I don't think anyone knows that they're subsidized homes. They're very nice apartment buildings. There's no reason to think that these would be.
Now there was the idea of perhaps crime spiking and all. Didn't law enforcement officials there in Poway weigh in on that?
They did. That was definitely a concern that came up with a lot of the residents. And law enforcement, I mean, in general, crime in Poway is very low. And Poway actually has police who specialize and focus just on the affordable housing and subsidized housing projects in Poway. And they said that, in general, crime is very low. And this project, because it was going to be for sale, so the people who were going to be living there were going to own those homes. They weren't renters who were going to come and go. There was even less of a reason to think that crime would go up there.
Now, the mayor, and we had a close vote, did we not, in November?
Yeah, it was 3-2 against the project, so it was very close.
All right, and Mayor Steve Voss voted against it, but not because of its nature or intent, is what he said. What was his reasoning?
Yeah, so Mayor Voss had two main reasons that he voted against the project. One was funding. The city, in addition to the land that they were going to donate, was also going to give about $800,000 in funding to help Habitat fill a funding gap. And then the project, there was a bit of a debate over to what extent the project could be exclusively for veterans, and Mayor Voss felt that the commitment that Habitat could provide wasn't enough.
Okay. Well, what happens now? Any chance that low-income housing is going to get built there? Is it back to the drawing board? Or?
Well, with that particular project on that particular plot of land, I don't imagine that they're going to come forward with something very soon. But there is another project that's working through the pipeline in a different part of Poway that could have a better shot, and the mayor has said that he's talking with another developer about a veterans project in a different part of Poway, so it's possible.
Kenny?
To what extent do you think the opposition was based on the fact that it was going to be quote-unquote affordable housing, and how much of the opposition was based on the fact that it would have been veterans living there?
I mean, I don't think that the opposition had anything to do with veterans. I think that it was because it was low-income housing, and I think even at the first meeting, you could see that a lot of the residents weren't even aware that it was going to be for veterans, and that was one of the reasons why they came out so strongly
that was sort
in
of
opposition.
immaterial then to the whole thing.
Yeah.
So it's really kind of NIMBY, not in my backyard. I mean, it all sounds great. We're all for affordable housing, but just not down the street from me, huh?
Yeah, and I mean, there are people who just don't think that there should be subsidized housing built in general. So it's probably a mix of those two things, but definitely not in my backyard played a huge role in this.
And as you say, it's playing out in other communities, and we'll keep, I'm sure you'll keep reporting on that as we move forward. All right, we're going to shift gears now. It has been the Republican mantra since 2009, get rid of Obamacare. That's proving easier said than done in the early days of the new Congress, and no state has bought into Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, as much as California, and no state will suffer more if Obamacare is repealed. So, Kenny, start with that. How much of a hit would California take if Congress actually repeals Obamacare?
Well, California will take a $20 billion a year hit in federal funds. About $15 billion of that goes to expanding the Medi-Cal program for the poor, and about $5 billion goes towards giving people subsidies so they can afford a plan through Covered California.
All right, and define that for us. Remind us of Medi-Cal. Who gets Medi-Cal? What is it, and how does it compare with the subsidies?
Medi-Cal's for low-income Californians.
The lowest income folks.
Right. Yeah. They can earn up to, I believe it's 138% of the federal poverty level. And since it was expanded in 2014 under Obamacare, there have been about 3.7 million additional Californians that have qualified and enrolled in Medi-Cal. And Covered California, of course, is the healthcare exchange where people can buy and shop for health plans.
The marketplace set up under the law.
Right, for people who don't have employer-based coverage.
All right, and it's hugely popular, as I said at the outset here. I mean, it's as I see the notes from your story, about a third of the population is getting some sort of Medi-Cal or subsidy
in California.
Yeah, right now
about 13 million Californians on Medi-Cal, so that's more than 1/3 of the population.
Yeah, that's a huge
in California.
Number.
Right, so we've got by far the biggest Medicaid program in the country. And if they repeal Obamacare and those federal subsidies to pay for it, I mean, the program's going to go belly up.
Yeah. Now, this sounded terrific as a campaign slogan, and of course, the House under Republican leadership, multiple times, 60-some times, sent bills up, knowing that the president, of course, would veto them if they got through the Senate. So it was great political theater. But now they're in control of all three branches of government, and you're really looking at doing this. And even some Republicans are dragging their feet a little bit, saying, well, wait a minute, we may be buying a chaotic situation that we're going to own.
Well, I mean, they've denounced it from day one. Republicans didn't participate in the making of Obamacare at all. None of them voted for it. And as you said, they've been opposed to it. So there's a real ideological opposition to it. And one of the things that people aren't talking about is the fact that if they repeal Obamacare, about $346 billion in tax hikes to the rich will evaporate. That's one of the ways that Obamacare was funded.
Used to subsidize the people on Medi-Cal, for example, and
to expand marketplace programs to other people. So in other words, people making over $200,000 a year in the U.S. would get a $346 billion tax cut over 10 years. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of money. So if they repeal Obamacare, that goes away, and that begs the question, well, how are they going to replace Obamacare?
Right, where would the funding be for it?
Yeah, where are they going to get it?
Right.
Because Republicans, as we know, they don't like raising taxes.
Right.
So if they eliminate that funding source, I don't know where they're going to get the money.
Well, we got a couple of bites here from both sides of the aisle. Trump and the congressional Republicans, they have been vague, as you say, about exactly how they're going to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act. Here's Speaker of the House Paul Ryan, how he put it this week.
We have a plan to replace it. We have plenty of ideas to replace it, and you'll see as the weeks and months unfold what we're talking about replacing it, how we can get better choices with lower prices by not having a cost of government takeover of health care, which is causing all this problem in the first place.
All right, well, then again, there was ideas there, but no specific plan. Now, here's Senate Minority Leader, Democrat Chuck Schumer of New York, talking about how the Democrats see it.
We have a great deal of optimism that the good things that have happened in ACA are going to stay, and that our Republican colleagues don't quite know what to do. They're like the dog who caught the bus. They can repeal, but they have nothing to put in its place, and that means so many good things go away.
All right, and for our radio folks, he's standing next to a big sign that says, "Make America Sick Again." This is going to be another huge political fight here, and they want to, they being the Republicans, are talking about symbolically this month, repealing this, have President Trump come in and sign it, and then what happens? Because they're talking about delaying for several years, perhaps, actually the impact of repealing and its political show, and what happens to the insurance markets?
Well, that's a very good question. And I'm sure Republicans will say that they have an idea, like Paul Ryan said. I haven't seen any ideas. What are they going to do?
They've had since 2009 to put forth specific ideas, and they say, as they say on certain websites and in certain proposals and campaign speeches, there have been bits of ideas. And all.
Well, I mean, I think fundamentally their approach is let's let the market correct this horrendous situation with Obamacare, and if we just subject health insurance to the free market, that it will correct itself. There's been no indication that that works anywhere, but I think they're still sticking by that.
And there's been a number of polls and opinion surveys on this. One was done by the Kaiser Family Foundation in early December here, just a few weeks ago. It showed only 20% of the public actually supports a full repeal the law. So I wonder if the GOP's rhetoric matches up with people who are out there in the trenches actually living in the insurance.
No, it doesn't
situation.
match it. It doesn't match it at all. In fact, I did a story this week on the fact that in California anyway, it's not just going to be people in Democratic strongholds in the state that are going to be displaced if Obamacare is repealed. It's people all over the state in heavily Republican districts, actually.
Is there anything that the
Maya?
state is looking at doing, or state legislatures, in the case that it is repealed or that there is a change to that system to kind of cushion the blow?
I think they're considering certain ideas, but the fact of the matter is, if Obamacare is repealed, that $20 billion hit, the state doesn't have the resources to make that up. They'd have to increase taxes, I don't know how much, to try to make up that revenue. So there's no way the state could sustain the Medi-Cal program in its expanded form if the federal money goes out, let alone provide tax credits to people to buy a plan on Covered California.
And we would go from a situation where, as we said, a number of people now have insurance under the ACA who would go back to being presumably just uninsured and showing up in emergency rooms, catastrophic bills in their personal lives, bankruptcies, et cetera.
Right. I mean, what Obamacare has done in California, it's cut the uninsured rate in half. And that's across all ethnic groups, across all people that have been eligible for these programs. So that's pretty significant. The other thing Obamacare has done nationwide is it's tried to at least get a foothold in this concept of prevention. Through Obamacare, you get free blood pressure screenings, colonoscopies, pap smears, mammograms, things like that, preventive tools that can prevent people from getting really sick or having a bad day.
And lower costs in the long run.
Right. And these come at no cost to the insurer, to the insurance holder, that is. So,
a couple seconds left. I did want to get to one specific proposal put forth by Paul Ryan, which would be perhaps per-person grants or a block grant to states such as California. What are analysts saying about those situations?
well, I think it's just all rhetoric. And until there's nuts and bolts put into these plans and they put some meat on the bone, so to speak, it sounds beautiful and, yeah, I'll go for it. But, what is it? They're not even saying what it is. So I think it's all conjecture and just rigmarole at this point.
Well, we'll be covering this along much detail going forward, I'm sure, with many more stories. Well, among the billionaires named to Donald Trump's cabinet is Betsy DeVos. She's a Christian conservative and Republican mega donor from Michigan who's been a tireless backer of education vouchers and diverting public funding to privately run charter schools. Marielle, start with Betsy DeVos. What do we know about her, and how does she see education? What would she like to see education? Where would it go in this country?
Sure. So I think you introduced her pretty well just in that little segment, right? She's a wealthy Republican donor who sees education as her vision of education is one of a privatized, market-based approach to it, right?
Get away from the broad-based public school system that we've had for a couple of centuries in this country.
Correct. I mean, teachers' unions and many other groups here is sort of an enemy to public education, as somebody that wants to privatize the system. She supported school vouchers for must be 30 years now, which would provide sort of when vouchers are issued, you can use that to attend parochial and private schools.
Give us a thumbnail. What is a charter school for those who may not be quite familiar with the concept?
Sure. So charter school is, first of all, it's a public school. I think a lot of times that's missed. So it's
publicly funded, certainly. Yeah.
Sure. It's a independently run but publicly funded school. In San Diego County, they're all nonprofit, run by a board of directors. They get some oversight from school districts. So when they want to open, they have to petition the school districts. Usually it's the school districts here in California. School districts have to look at their plan and say, okay, we see what you want to do. We see your measures of progress, and you can open and stay open for 2 to 5 years, and then we'll come back and review it.
And who can attend? How do you get into a charter school?
Yeah, so charter schools are open to any student. So as opposed to like a neighborhood school where there's a
geographically defined.
Right, exactly.
You're in this neighborhood, you go to the neighborhood school.
Right. Anybody, any student from any zip code can get into.
So again, it's the marketplace idea you were alluding to earlier. So give us a sense of the scope. How many students in San Diego attend charter schools right now?
So in San Diego Unified, it's been steadily growing. There's about 20%. I think the last estimate I saw is 20% of students in San Diego Unified attend charter schools. So that would be about 26,000 students.
So it's not insignificant. It's a big chunk of kids are going
right.
to these schools. Now, you reported the debate over public versus charter schools, even though it is a form of public school, that is coming to a head in San Diego and across the country. In fact, the NAACP has called for a moratorium. What's the crux of this debate?
So the crux of the NAACP argument is that charter schools in general create a two-tier public education system, which was never the intention, which would be fundamentally unconstitutional. So they push back. They say, let's hold up on the charter school expansion until we can figure out some other things. Now there's all sorts of ways that it's coming to a head, and I think we are now we're talking about some of that through Betsy DeVos and school choice in general. This is an issue that's playing out across the country, not just with charter schools, but when it comes to school vouchers or just school choice in general.
And the marketplace getting more involved, as it were, in education than simply the government-run schools, as the GOP tends to characterize them.
Right.
Okay. Now, you talked about Gompers School in particular here. First, tell us where Gompers is, because it's kind of typical. A lot of the charter schools are making inroads in minority communities, and that's true of Gompers School here in San Diego, and it seems transformed in the past decade or so as a charter school compared to when it was a public school, right?
Yeah, I want to say when it was around 2005 is when they converted from a traditional public school to a charter school, and since then their enrollment has grown and they have made some improvements. So, I mean, when you go to Gompers, the first thing that you notice, at least the first thing that I noticed on the campus, is that there's this palpable type of school spirit, right? The students talk in a certain way. Words take on this greater meaning. They don't just walk into the gates of the school. It's the gates of wisdom. And it's sort of
there's a pride in going there, and there's a certain standard that everyone adheres to.
And by all appearances, the students seem to really buy into it and sort of eat it up. I was there on the first day of school, and they had the school. It was time to sing the school song, and there was all the students were singing. I just couldn't imagine a similar situation happening at a traditional public school, for better
or especially perhaps an inner city school, which has got all sorts of problems within a community. Now, the school itself, this Gompers, it's kind of night and day what you're describing now as 10, 12 years ago before the charter school took over, right?
Yeah, obviously I wasn't around then, but we can talk to people that were there, and it just sounds like a campus that was sort of plagued by violence. Vince Riverall, who is now the director of the school, talks about how he would, on his first day of school, some student asked him, "Why are you wearing a suit? It's just going to get torn when you have to break up a fight." So we're talking about fights that were very prevalent, and when we're thinking of that vision to what you see today.
Whole different atmosphere.
Yeah, correct.
And yet now we go to the rubber meets the road test scores. They're so prevalent in our society when we talk about schools these days. Let's talk about Lincoln High nearby, which is not a charter school here. How do the test scores at Gompers compare with that other neighborhood adjacent school? Yeah,
so that's interesting, right? Because the scores from Gompers to Lincoln are actually comparable in some ways. So I think Gompers is a bit higher in English, and Lincoln is a bit higher when it comes to math. But yet there does seem to be this reputation about Gompers that if you go there, you're going to get to college and you will have a successful career after high school. And so in some ways, it's this promise and it's this school spirit that parents are buying into, even more than the test scores that we would think would be the driving factor and school choice.
Kenny?
What would prevent public schools from doing whatever Gompers has done to try to create a better learning atmosphere for kids and a more success-oriented system?
Yeah, so that's a million-dollar question, right? Because charter schools credit a lot of their success to the fact that they can pick their own teachers. They have freedom to hire and fire as opposed to traditional
They're
public
non-union
school.
teachers?
Right, most are non-union.
And motivated students and parents from elsewhere that can come there where they're not just having the neighborhood kids come in.
Right. If you talk to some of these charter school leaders, though, for example, Gompers and John Dean at O'Farrell has said this specifically, you can do exactly everything that we've done here at O'Farrell, you can do at a traditional public school. So, there's differences. There are some structural differences that would make it difficult. For example, traditional public schools would have to adhere to the collective bargaining agreements hammered out by teachers' unions, where a charter school wouldn't have to do that. But there is a thought that it's very possible if you were to approach it.
A few seconds left. The new Education Secretary, Betsy DeVos, we expect she'll push giving vouchers and more charter schools and expand that nationwide. That's the idea then?
Yeah, that's the idea. That was the first question that I asked, but it turns out in California, there's just not a lot she could do to really. Vouchers sound sort of like a non-starter, something that we covered as a state back in 1993.
But in other parts of the country, she may have more success with that.
She may, yeah.
Well, we'll see what happens as we go along. We are out of time. That does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guest, Maya Sri Krishna, of Voice of San Diego, Kenny Goldberg of KPBS News, and Mario Caran of Voice of San Diego. A reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thank you for joining us today on the Roundtable.